بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكرك الغافلون اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وأذهب غيظ قلوبنا وأجرنا من مضلات الفتن ما أحييتنا يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. Today I wanted to cover some points which culminate to a singular point, a universal point, which I will mention toward the end of the lecture. But these points start from, firstly, the belief in the akhirah. So the first point is with regard to belief in al-ghayb. Having strong conviction with regard to the ghayb, the unseen realm. That we have belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the greatest unseen. And then we have belief in al-Jannah. And then we have belief with regard to Jahannam and Malaika, angels, Alam al-Malaika, and al-Samawat al-Sab', the seven heavens, and all this creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by which there is no role of the intellect to determine what exists in the unseen realm. This relates then to our life on earth. That what role do we play on earth? That if we look at the worldly life, if we believe that there is only the world that we observe, everything that we observe is all that exists, then our existence would be limited to the material realm. And this then brings us onto the point with regard to the subjectivity of what is known as evil. Because when you determine evil and what is evil, it becomes subjective. For instance, when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, now she is no longer Prime Minister. That is shar for Liz Truss. It's evil for Liz Truss. But the new cabinet that comes in, it's khair. So this demonstrates the subjectivity of good and evil. Or for instance, in some countries you have one-way traffic, but in other countries you will have two-way traffic. If someone is driving down a one-way road, they will deem it evil because they do not have permission to drive up the other road. So similarly for the snake, the poison of the snake is good for the snake because it poisons its victim and then consumes the victim, the anaconda snake or whatever snake. But for the victim it is deemed as being evil. And this subjectivity of evil is linked to the belief of the unseen. Why? Because on the day of judgment, Yawm al-Qiyamah, we will have the full picture of everything that occurs on earth. That events occur on earth today and we do not know the full wisdom of those events. But when we want to understand the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must observe the entire picture, and the entire picture does not become clear until Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of judgment. Then everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created is khair in itself. How? Like the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam states, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ, that every child that is born on al-fitrah. What is al-fitrah? Al-fitrah is the natural disposition. Like these young children, they have a natural disposition that they do not know deception, they do not know lying until they learn it from adults. They do not know what is known as su'ul akhlaq, bad manners, al-akhlaq al-sayyi'ah, bad manners, except when they learn this from adults. So every child is born on al-fitrah. Then what does the hadith state? That then the parents, yuhawwidani, they make him a Jew. Or they make him what? A Christian. They misguide him. They misguide the child. They place him in misguidance. So like this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created everything, the earth that we live in. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, I shall make on the earth what? A Khalifa, a caretaker, someone to represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth. The earth was given with perfection. The child was born with perfection. So then you have what? The developing earth. That we are tasked to develop the earth. That if we did, as Khalifatullahi ala al-ard, as those who represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth, if we do not look after the oceans, we do not look after the rivers, we do not develop the earth correctly, then it leads to what David Attenborough now is crying about, that the earth, the environment of the earth and the ecology of the earth is damaged. Why? Because the human being has not carried out his role correctly. Similarly, when we develop the earth, we must maintain a balance in society in terms of what? Everything that occurs on earth, whether it relates to crime or retaliation for crimes. So this point then links onto something else. That the difference between intelligence and instinct. What is instinct? Animals have instinct. They go out into the field, and by instinct they eat the grass. But the human being has something which is known as al-aql, which makes us different to animals. Irrelevant to what they teach you in schools with regard to the evolution theory and the competition amongst creation, human beings have two things which make them different. One is intellect, the other is free will. But what is intellect? Intellect is different to instinct. Instinct is that a lion, for instance, would want to eat its prey, so it eats the prey. While the intellect of a human being is something that gives us choice. That we may have an instinct, but sometimes the instinct is wrong. That we must follow the intellect. But the intellect then must follow al-wahyu, which is what? Divine revelation. Because like an eye needs an external light. If you enter a room and the room is dark, you may have a perfect eye, a perfectly functioning eye, but you cannot see in the dark. You need an external light in order to see what is in the room. Similarly, the intellect may work and function perfectly, but the intellect is in need of an external light, and that external light is the Wahyu al-Quran. The Wahy of al-Quran al-Kareem and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But what is the role of the human being, and what makes us different to the four levels maratibul khalq? What are the maratibul khalq? The levels of creation. If we observe everything around us is either material. The minerals that we observe, these minerals that we extract from the earth. But then when you go one stage further, you go into the world of plants. That the plants, they grow, but they do not have instinct. But they do grow. Then you go onto a higher level, which is what? The level of animals, that the animals have feelings, the animals have instinct. Then the final martaba is the martaba of al-insan, human beings, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed us with intellect, al-aql, by which we can make distinction between things. So, when we exist on this earth, there is a wisdom why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though He has given all of us intellect, the intellects will differ. Someone is born with a higher capacity, someone is born with a lower capacity. There is a wisdom in this, because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not place various levels, varying levels of capacity, then the doctor, if everyone became a doctor, an astroscientist, astrophysicist, then who will collect our rubbish? Who will clean the streets? Who will construct the buildings? Who will clean up the masajid? But this does not mean that the person who cleans the rubbish is denigrated in any way. Why? Because even the rubbish cleaner has a wisdom, or many wisdoms, that the astrophysicist will never have. At one point in Al-Madinah al-Munawwarah, there was a Bangladeshi cleaner that would clean the roads. And of course, some people would denigrate him out of racism. But this man, this Bangladeshi cleaner, when he went into the masjid, Al-Masjid al-Nabawi al-Sharif, when he prayed his salah, he went into sajda, he passed away. The rank of that man is higher than the man living in a palace, indulging in his shahwat, in his desires. So never judge a person by the job that he does. Because a person who works in the fields, he will have many wisdoms that other people will not have. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with varying intellects. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a balance. Someone may have beauty, someone may have height, someone may have wealth, someone may have intellect, someone may have eloquence of speech, yet all of this is in accordance with the divine wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why hasad is haram. Why? Because the one who is hasid, he questions the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he sees a good trait in another believer. This is why envy is haram and made haram by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then, when the human being does not follow the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as laid out in Al-Quran Al-Kareem, does not exercise the intellect to understand Al-Quran Al-Kareem and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, this leads to what we know as shar. This leads to what we know as evil in the world. That when we exchange the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for man-made laws, laws that undergo change every 4 years, that they will experiment for a few years, then they realize injections do not work. They will experiment for a few more years, they realize prisons do not work. They will experiment for a few more years. Every few years they will keep changing the law. But when humanity follows the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees that the shar is decreased amongst humanity. Like in the khilafah of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, if a goat dies on the banks of the Euphrates, then Umar is responsible. This was Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu carrying out the responsibility of being Khalifa al-Ard. If Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu were Khalifa today, he would not develop nuclear weapons. He would not develop those type of machinery that damage the environment, or that which kills and maims indiscriminately, or that which is toxic and destroys the earth, and those people who cut down the rainforest, and then they cry regarding the environment and what humanity has done with various types of crime. In the name of human rights, they diminish human rights. Because if it were not for the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you would not have murders of passion, where a man finds his wife is committing adultery, or the wife finds the husband is committing adultery, and they carry out murders of passion, where they may kill not only the husband or the wife, they will kill other innocent bystanders. If the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is applied, it prevents such type of killings. Similarly, the thief, when he steals, the thief and his hand is not amputated, then the thief becomes free on the land to steal from multiple people, that people have no safety on the earth. But we live in a time today that people tarnish the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order that the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is made out to be barbaric, but man-made law is made to seem as the law of humanity, which is guidance, which is turning the scales, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed a scale, and humanity must maintain that scale. So from this we know that Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is from the time of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. How is Sharia from the time of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam? When Habil and Qabil, what did they have? They had a dispute, and the sacrifice was accepted from Habil. It was not accepted from Qabil. And what happened? He killed his brother. This was the first wretched act having been committed. That if you look at crimes of humanity, they will have, for the main part, three things. One is murder and violence. The second is zina, sexual sins. And the third is what? Sins for what? For wealth, for gaining wealth. All these crimes these are the underlying problems. Then you can add khamr, alcohol, also to these lists of crimes. But the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places prevention. If the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is applied, then the balance is restored on earth. Balance is restored amongst humanity. So, here, why is human intellect insufficient in determining what should be right and wrong? Because human intellect can only see to a certain degree. If we have, for instance, a computer, a laptop, when you have this laptop, the person who created the laptop, who invented the laptop, he will have a manual telling you how to work the laptop. You wouldn't go to a carpenter to learn how to use a laptop. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created humanity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the earth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down رَسَائِلُ الْحُبِّ, the letters of love. What are those letters of love? Al-Quran al-Kareem. And its explanation, which is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So this brings me to the apex of the talk, which is what? That all the previous nations were punished when they would not apply the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Today, the majority of the earth is not ruled and governed by the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet we are not punished in totality. Why is this? Because Sayyiduna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was sent, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We did not send you except as a mercy for the universes. And this includes the non-Muslims, that today the non-Muslims are not punished as a whole, because Sayyiduna Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is a mercy for the universe. Their punishment is delayed for the akhirah. Some of them may be punished, segments, different tyrants, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, but as a whole they are punished in al-akhirah. That Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is sent as a mercy for the universes. And then, to add to this, a few more points with regard to wealth, human wealth. That today when people want to measure goodness, they measure it through what? Material wealth. That you would be surprised the level at which people are attached to material wealth. What is the longest verse in Al-Quran al-Kareem? Those of you who are not kuffar, raise your hands if you know the longest verse of Al-Quran al-Kareem. What does it relate to? It relates to what?
To the mercy of Allah.
No. It relates to trading. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا تداينتم بدين إلى أجل مسمى فاكتبوه. To the end of the verse, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهِ. This is the longest verse in Surah Al-Baqarah. This verse, which relates to trade, why is the longest verse of Al-Quran al-Kareem on trade? Because of the dishonesty of human beings when it comes to trading. Similarly, which ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are outlined in the Quran in detail by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and are not left to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Which issue? The issue of what? Mirath, inheritance laws. Why? Because the attachment people have to wealth. So today when you see disputes amongst people, like the stabbing that happened in Coventry, with the young men stabbed the man in the masjid, and you see these various disputes in our community, that they dispute over material wealth. Why are they disputing over material wealth? Because Iman in the ghaib has weakened. And they see material wealth as khair, as all goodness, even though you may have a man who is so rich, yet he has health problems. He cannot even eat his food. Or wealth can become a curse. A man may have so much wealth, yet his son becomes a gambler. his son becomes a drug addict. Wealth can become a curse and a trial for a person, that when a person starts amassing wealth, he doesn't control the wealth controls him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave people wealth for what? For constructing the world. Because for instance, if someone constructed a building, he has wealth, he has amassed wealth, he will spend money on what? On cement, on the steel works, on the architect, on the construction. All of this money will go out. When that money goes out, the sustenance of those people who are paid is written down for them. So in expenditure there is khair. But if the man stores the wealth away, cities are never constructed. Manufacturing never occurs. People go into abject poverty. So spending money has more khair than holding back money. But at the same time, there are people who amass wealth and they think they control the wealth, but in reality the wealth controls them. This wealth that people amass, when they become attached to it, by holding it back, they become attached. So when they die with that attachment to the wealth. When the wealth overwhelms the heart, then what happens? A person, his iman in the ghaib decreases. He becomes materialistic. And when he becomes materialistic, he abandons the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the curse of wealth. That in this day and age, in this age of materialism that has enveloped our communities, that people are becoming obsessed with wealth, thinking that amassing wealth is a rizq. This is not rizq. Rizq is what? Rizq is what you eat, what you wear, where you live. That is rizq. Sometimes you may gather so much wealth that in reality you are gathering that wealth for someone else. A man all his life, he saves £500,000. Now, of course, the currency is going down, so it's worthless. Then it goes, he what saves this paper money, fiat currency, the inheritance tax, of course, it goes lower and lower and the money is devalued. Soon they'll bring the inheritance tax to 250,000. Every homeowner may be taxed. That's how crazy the economic system is. But a person saves this money, formerly with the Queen's head, soon to be with Charles' head, not Charles the First's head, Charles the Third. And then what happens is this money, the value goes down, the man saves the money, and he thinks he will spend the money on himself, he dies. What happens? The sons inherit the money if they avoid the inheritance tax. 40% goes to the taxman. And then what happens even if the 40% to the taxman doesn't happen, his sons will take the money. One may be a gambler, the other may be a drug addict, the third one may be devoted to his wife and he spends all the money and gives all the money away to his wife, who is a spendthrift. And all that money is gone. And he has been attached to that money all his life. So what is the solution? Of course, there were many other points, but there is plenty of time. But the people have been sitting long enough during the Burda. Yes. So what happens? What is the solution to this? The solution is increasing our iman, our sweetness. Halawatul iman. Increasing our sweetness of iman. How do we increase sweetness of iman? By increasing our love for Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why I commend the Burda gatherings. Why? Because they increase the love for Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then what? Increasing our love for Al-Quran al-Kareem. And then looking to the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for guidance in every aspect of our lives. For instance, which chapter of Al-Quran al-Kareem mentions the rules of knocking a door? Surah Al-Ahzab. Yes, that when you knock someone's door, what do? How you wait, the adab, the manners of even knocking someone's door. As I mentioned, the longest verse is on trade. Then the ahkam relating to nikah, the ahkam, legal rulings relating to talaq, the ahkam, which surah of the Quran prohibits backbiting? Surah Al-Hujurat. And then what? Having bad opinions of Muslims. Majority of bad opinions are prohibited. And even the odd bad opinion that's permitted, you are not permitted to say it. So the majority of bad opinions of other Muslims, it's not permitted. And the small amount of bad opinion that is permitted in Sharia, you cannot ever utter it without justification. Then, additionally, spying on one another is prohibited. All of these ahkam in Surah Al-Hujurat. Additionally, in Surah An-Nur, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the men and women to lower their gaze. Why modesty? Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed the intellect in the brain, placed the ruh in the heart, and placed al-haya in the eye. Modesty in the eye. That you keep your eyes and your gaze lowered when you see women, and women keep their eyes lowered when they see men. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the believers, the believing women and men, to have modesty. So modesty is a part of our faith, our iman. That when we decrease in modesty, when we decrease in modesty and we increase in profanity and violence, where is the verse on the prohibition of two Muslim groups fighting one another? In Surah Al-Hujurat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited two Muslim groups fighting one another. Yet when we look at gang violence, of course Oxford, according to its reputation, would not be as bad as Birmingham. Yes, but what happens? Gang violence, drugs, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited alcohol, intoxication. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited immodesty. Look at the rules and regulations where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited zina, fornication and adultery. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Do not even approach a zina. إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. That it is what? Immoral and a bad way of letting out your desires. You wouldn't have the abortion debate if it weren't for zina. You wouldn't have people abandoning young orphans and children in the orphanage if it were not for zina. You would not have HIV and AIDS spreading if it were not for zina. That there is wisdom in Al-Quran Al-Kareem. When you study the Quran, and that is in Surah Al-Isra, Surah Al-Bani Israel, Surah number 17 of Al-Quran Al-Kareem, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us various admonitions regarding the prohibitions that we do not become like Bani Israel. That if we become like Bani Israel, then our kingdom would finish the way the kingdom of Bani Israel finished. And our kingdom has finished. And in a hadith, in the Musnad of Al-Imam Al-Daylami, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Al-Ama'im Tijanu Al-Arab. The Ama'im, the headwrap, Al-Ama'im, the headwrap, they are the crowns of the Arabs. When they leave the Ama'im, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove their kingdom. Now some people consider the hadith weak, but when you look at the abolition from the deposing of a Sultan Abdul Hamid al-Thani rahimahullah ta'ala in 1908 and 1909, and then from 1924 the formal abolition of the Khilafah, what happened in those countries where the Arabs would wear ama'im, they abandoned the ama'im. So when we do not carry out the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we do not desist from the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we face disgrace in the dunya and the akhirah. I can go into various things like the riba, the profusion of usury, alcohol, zina, fornication and adultery, inner fighting amongst Muslims, backbiting, spying, having bad thoughts about other Muslims without justification. All of these various things we do. So what do we leave tonight with? That collectively today we do tawbah. No one leaves this all except that if they abandon their salah, they will never abandon a single prayer from this day. Inshallah. That if they committed zina, and I have good one that no one here commits zina, but if you know of anyone, and if there is a potential of anyone having done so, that they do tawbah today. before they leave the hall, they will never carry out zina, adultery, or any of, meaning sexual sins of any nature. Anyone who drinks khamr, alcohol, or takes cannabis, or any of these balloons, these gas balloons that youngsters are taking, that before they leave this hall, we all do collective tawbah. Additionally, if you earn haram, or you lie and deceive in your trade, that today before we leave, remember that money becomes a curse. It becomes a curse that before we leave today, we do tawbah from that sin. Additionally, so many various other sins that we may do, like profanities or any other thing, that before we leave this hall today, we do collective tawbah, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for husnul khatimah. And remember that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is rahmatun lil alameen. His sharia is rahmah. That when we follow the sharia of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it's a mercy for us. فَلَنُحْيِيَنَّهُمْ حَيَاةً طَيِّبًا. That anyone who does a good action, from what? Min dhakarin aw untha, from a male or a female, and what? He's a believer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guarantees him a worldly pure life. Some people think it's only in the akhirah. If you follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your worldly life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you what? Contentment. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. Behold with the dhikrillah. What is dhikrillah? The Quran. Behold with the remembrance of Allah, the hearts find what? Contentment. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us contentment of heart. Ameen. Make us grasp onto the Quran. Ameen. And the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Increase our istighfar, increase our salawat and salam upon the best of creation. أقول قولي هذا